In the early hours of September 29, 2005, 23-year-old Levi Gast was weaving along Illinois' Route 36 at 80 miles per hour. An Iraq War veteran, he was feeling suicidal and had taken more than 90 tablets of Tylenol and smoked some crack before he got behind the wheel.
My name's Gast, and my son's Levi Gast. And he just called me and left a message on my phone, and this is a suicide call.
Okay. Where is he at?
I don't know. He could be anywhere.
A year before, Gast had returned from Iraq. While there, his team conducted housing raids on Little Sleep and experienced intermittent firefights with often unseen enemies. When Gast came home, his mother said he was different.
I don't know, he seemed more withdrawn, seemed to want to party a lot, and again, I didn't think that was so strange because of, where he'd been, what he'd seen. My father was in the Korean War, and he also, that was something us kids grew up knowing. You did not discuss that with him. So when Levi came home and didn't discuss it, I didn't push it.
A few months earlier, Gast had become depressed after breaking up with his pregnant girlfriend, who he said was unfaithful.
I mean, it was the kind of depression you could feel it. And when you got off the phone with him, you were depressed. You felt, it was heavy, it was dark.
Just after returning from Iraq, and while still on active duty, Gast had started using crack cocaine and abusing alcohol to blot out his despair. After going AWOL for a week and failing an Army drug test, Gast was discharged, and his drug problem got worse when he returned home. A soldier's exposure to combat can cause psychological trauma that radiates far beyond the battlefield, and to cope, a number of returning soldiers self-medicate with alcohol or drugs, which can make them both a danger to themselves and to the people around them. Dr. Thomas Grieger, a retired Navy captain, is an expert on combat trauma.
Clearly a red flag would be an onset of a substance abuse problem or a worsening of a substance abuse problem, because that causes not only worsening of the psychological condition, it causes a disruption in their social functioning, can lead to a loss of employment, and can lead to behaviors that they wouldn't otherwise engage in.
And on September 29th, according to prosecutors, Gast's suicide attempt crossed over into criminal territory.
This driver is all over the road. He's straddling the dividing line and getting into lane of oncoming traffic. I'm falling back a little bit. Adam 410, what is your current speed? 80 miles an hour.
And at 2:55 a.m., whether it was the effects of the crack, the overdose of Tylenol, the loss of blood when he sliced his wrists, the adrenaline from the pursuit, or perhaps intentionally, Levi Gast slammed into a newspaper delivery truck on the side of the road.
On Route 36, just in Howard, we need an ambulance to rescue immediately.
Killing Michael Mann, a married father of 4, on his way to work. Mann's family declined all requests to be interviewed for this story. Levi Gast was seriously injured.
This is not something that I would have normally done. This is not something that a rational person would do. Devastating. I didn't know if I was going to be able to walk, and then I knew that I'd, killed this guy in a car accident, and from what I understand, he was just driving to work that day.
It wasn't until after the accident that Gast's mother took him to see a local mental health specialist to get to the bottom of what was troubling her son. Their diagnosis? Post-traumatic stress disorder.
I think one of the issues with post-traumatic stress disorder is that it isn't necessarily apparent to people around you, or from your own personal perspective, it may not seem like something that is worthy of treatment in comparison to seeing comrades who've been killed in action.
But Dr. Grieger says the psychological damage from PTSD is real and has been linked to self-destructive violence by returning soldiers. The New York Times has found 121 cases where veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan committed a killing after coming home from war. And, in about half the cases, substance abuse was involved.
To the degree that someone is heavily abusing a substance, it makes it much more difficult to treat post-traumatic stress disorder. because you're numbing out the symptoms rather than dealing with the symptoms and putting them out front and trying to understand them and come up with coping strategies to deal with them. You're simply numbing them away, but that only lasts till the next morning, and then you're back where you were.
But how does one get back to normal when chaos and the constant threat of death have become everyday realities? In his hometown of Minneapolis, Iraq veteran Anthony Klecker struggled with the transition home.
You know, you're gone 8 months, and you're one person, and you come back and you're completely different. The way you talk, the way you see things, the way you feel about your family. You don't want to be around people, you avoid people. I went to a Twins game once here, and I had to leave because there were so many people around me that I didn't feel safe. Always watching my back. Being angry a lot because people I don't believe people understood me.
During his tour in Iraq, Klecker experienced heavy combat on the supply convoys moving into Baghdad. They were, at times, crippled by blinding sandstorms.
The sandstorm was horrible. It's the worst thing I've ever been through, and I wouldn't wish it upon anybody. I couldn't see 6 inches to a foot in front of me. There was firefights going off everywhere around me during that time. I expected it to be chaos, and it was chaos. I was fearful for my life, but if I would have concentrated on that, I wouldn't have been able to do my job.
As a Marine, Klecker was trained to operate under intense circumstances.
There was a point where I had to fire upon a vehicle that was getting too close to our convoy. It was either me and my Marines to die, or the person that was trying to harm us. They wouldn't stop their vehicle, so I unloaded quite a bit of rounds into the vehicle.
Once home, Klecker continued to be haunted by the incident and found that the decisions he made under combat stress were hard to explain.
I'm ashamed of what I did, sometimes, but it was for, a purpose. So then when I started getting back to the civilian world, people wouldn't understand that. Saying that to somebody would kind of make them nervous around me.
Anxious and troubled by nightmares, Klecker's only solace was alcohol.
My parents and friends and family, would be telling me they think that I'm drinking a little bit too much, or that I shouldn't be so angry about this or feel this way, but they didn't go through the things that I did.
Klecker found himself getting into bar fights and experiencing road rage as his drinking spiraled out of control. Then, on October 28, 2006, after a night of bar hopping, Klecker slammed his car into a concrete barrier, pushing it into oncoming traffic, causing an accident that killed Deanna Casey, a 16-year-old cheerleader on her way home from work.
It was the most gut-wrenching thing I've ever had to experience in my life. As a parent, I still have that horrible feeling that I failed at not being able to protect my child.
Officers at the scene said Klecker stank of alcohol and arrested him. Brock Hunter, a Minnesota lawyer and an Army vet, has actively defended numerous vets who have gotten into trouble. He immediately suspected Anthony was suffering from the effects of combat trauma.
Within a minute of talking to him, it was quite obvious that he was a veteran who was in some significant psychological distress. The 1,000-yard stare that is so often referred to, a level of tension in his body language that was impossible to miss.
The first time we went to court is when I learned that Mr. Klecker was a veteran and that he was telling his attorney that he was suffering from post-traumatic stress. As a police officer myself, I've had to see bad, horrible things. You could say that I've suffered from post-traumatic stress. So my reaction was, well, Mr. Klecker, suck it up like the rest of us have to do. It doesn't give you an excuse to go out and drink in excess, get behind the wheel, and drive a vehicle that then kills another human being.
Could the destructive actions of returning soldiers like Levi Gast and Anthony Klecker have been prevented? Dr. Grieger says there's no simple answer.
One of the issues is that many individuals don't initially recognize it as being a problem until they've had it for a period of time, or they're reluctant to seek mental health care because they talk to friends that were deployed and they're not reporting similar symptoms. It's very common for people, even though we screen for post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, substance abuse, and possible violence among all soldiers returning from deployment, many of them do not endorse that they're having those symptoms or are concerned about those problems or that they need treatment, even though it was causing horrible disruptions and problems with their lives.
But addressing those needs is an uphill battle, especially for a military mental health system that a Pentagon task force says is overburdened, understaffed, short on funds, and undermined by the stigma attached to PTSD.
So it was there, it was offered, but I think there's a lot of stigmatism still that goes with that, going to get help, especially when you're in the Marine Corps.
Mm-hmm. Anthony Klecker pled guilty to vehicular homicide and wrote a letter of apology to Deanna Casey's family.
I felt that he knew that he had a problem. He wanted to change his behavior. And I don't believe that he chose that night to get in a car and say, I'm going to kill somebody. So do I think he's a bad person? No. I think he made a really bad choice that night.
Both the judge and the victim's family decided that Klecker needed counseling, not jail time. He was given an unusual sentence that combined probation with intensive treatment at the VA facility and community service.
Anthony was clearly in distress and clearly dealing with the haunting memories of the war. We sent them to this war. If they came home with an injury to their psyche from that war that had a direct bearing in them getting into trouble with the law, I do think that we owe them the benefit of the doubt on some level.
But the courts are still sorting out how to handle returning vets who commit crimes. A life was also lost when Levi Gast got behind the wheel, but the outcome of his case couldn't have been more different than Anthony Klecker's. 5 months after the car crash that killed Michael Mann, Gast thought he would face a manslaughter charge.
It was a Friday, February 24th of 2006. My lawyer called and said, you need to go turn yourself in at Douglas County. They're charging you with first-degree murder. I was like, whoa, that almost knocked me off my feet. I couldn't believe it.
At his bench trial, the victim's wife wrote that she, quote, had feelings of hate towards Levi Gast for his role in her husband's death. In the end, the judge ruled that Gast had intentionally tried to kill himself by ramming into Michael Mann's pickup truck. Gast is currently serving a 25-year sentence for first-degree murder at a maximum security prison in southern Illinois.
It's very hard to deal with, especially being in here, every day I think, how I'm in here for first-degree murder with all these other guys that have actually shot somebody or cut somebody up, that's just not me.
Gast says his lawyer, who dealt mostly with DUI cases, hardly mentioned his war experience or the possibility that he was having difficulties because of it.
My lawyer, it didn't really come into play, and I figured it would have. And like I said, this is my first time ever really being in trouble, so I figured he knew what he was doing. My lawyer had talked me out of taking a jury trial, which I think was a huge mistake. I think a jury would have seen it differently, and hopefully I can get back into court.
Gast is appealing his sentence. Gast's mother believes that the military let her son down. When the Army discovered he had a drug problem while still on active duty, the Army did not treat his addiction, and he was discharged.
The military really does have a zero tolerance for drug abuse, so it's sort of a double punishment. You're being discharged, even though you may have been previously a good soldier or a Marine, and you're going to be denied care for the disorder that you wouldn't have had but for your service to your country.
I think that what happened that night started the day they let him out, knowing that he had a serious drug issue. It's like they threw him out in the world and said, you're on your own. And it's kind of like telling the world, well, sorry, we put this guy back out there. You just deal with it the best way you know how. I'm angry. I'm angry. They owed him more than that. Nobody made him go to Iraq. He did that because he wanted to serve his country. He wanted to do something good. He wanted his life to mean something. And that when he comes back and he's got issues because of what happened, and they're done with him,